We're here with our friend Stephen Miller, the ubiquitous Stephen Miller, and that's a good thing. You know, Stephen Miller, President Trump sees the manufacturing base in this country over the last quarter century really on its back as a result of tax policies and other policies of our government. He sees a bloated government completely out of control. Doge made that quite obvious. He sees tax rates on our corporations that are higher than anywhere else in the free industrial world. He sees all these things going on, and he's trying to tackle them one after another. He wants to slash taxes, slash them for corporations. He wants companies to come into the United States. He's trying to reduce the size of government, get rid of the bloat and so forth and so on one side, create wealth and prosperity, tax cut. And on the other, he's saying, look, we've got to reindustrialize America. Our manufacturing base is hurting and so forth and so on. And of course, he gets resistance from the same quarters that have been overseeing this decline. What do you make of all this?
Mark, the same people that are criticizing President Trump's agenda to restore America, to usher in this new golden age, are the ones who ordered us to lock down during COVID and close all of the schools. They're the ones who opened the borders and flooded our cities with illegal aliens. They're the ones who brought us nothing but death and destruction in the Middle East.
So let me ask you something. When does a leaked email turn into a full-blown political crisis overnight? When it exposes exactly what everyone suspected, but nobody could prove. And right now, we're watching that play out in real time with Stephen Miller. Over 100 members of Congress just demanded his immediate resignation. Over 100. That's not some fringe group making noise. That's a massive coordinated response. And what triggered it? Emails. Leaked emails that show Miller sharing white nationalist propaganda with right-wing media outlets. Yeah, you heard that right. White nationalist propaganda from inside the White House. Now, here's where this gets absolutely wild. This isn't exactly new information. Some of these emails first leaked back in 2019. The Southern Poverty Law Center exposed them years ago. But why is Congress suddenly demanding action now? Why the overnight uproar? Because Miller's back in power, and this time, people aren't letting it slide. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
One disaster after another. They are the ones who empowered a federal bureaucracy to steal our rights and our voices as citizens, crush dissent, crush free speech, crush industry. They're the ones who allowed China and foreign countries to take our most essential industries out of the United States, gravely imperiling our national security and destroying the working and middle classes of this country. That is what President Trump inherited. That is what he is boldly and bravely repairing every single day. The southern border now, under his leadership, has the lowest number of legal crossings in the history of the United States of America. Not in the last 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, in the history of these United States. Under President Trump, for the first time since the rise of China, we are protecting and defending our jobs and our manufacturing base. And we are preventing foreign countries from making it impossible to defend ourselves in the event of a national emergency.
Think about that for a second. We're talking about one of the most powerful advisors to the president, someone who literally shaped immigration policy for years, and he was caught red-handed pushing content from extremist websites, sites like VDare, sites that promote white nationalist ideology. And he wasn't just reading this stuff in private. No, he was actively sharing it with journalists to influence media coverage. Can you believe this? Like, this is the guy who helped craft the Muslim ban, the guy behind family separations at the border. And now we know, we have the receipts that he was getting his ideas from literal white nationalist sources. The evidence is right there in black and white. But here's the kicker. Despite all of this, despite over 100 members of Congress calling for his resignation, despite civil rights groups sounding the alarm, Trump's standing by him, the GOP standing by him. They're not just defending him, they're doubling down. Acting like this is all some political witch hunt. And that right there, that's what makes this story so explosive right now. Because we're not just talking about one advisor's controversial views. We're talking about a fundamental question facing this country. What kind of rhetoric is acceptable at the highest levels of government? Where do we draw the line? And who gets to decide? The Democrats are furious. Civil rights organizations are demanding investigations. Jewish members of Congress, 25 of them, signed a letter back in 2019 calling for Trump to fire Miller, but nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. And now, with Trump back in office for his second term, Miller's influence is only growing. Here's what nobody's really talking about, though. Miller didn't just stumble upon these white nationalist sites by accident. The emails show a pattern, a deliberate strategy. He was sharing content from a racist novel called Camp of the Saints, a book that's basically a white nationalist fantasy about immigration destroying Western civilization. He was promoting conspiracy theories. He was pushing narratives designed to stoke fear about immigrants and minorities. And this wasn't casual stuff either. We're talking about over 900 emails reviewed by the Southern Poverty Law Center. 900. That's not a few bad moments. That's a documented record of someone's actual ideology. That's a paper trail that shows exactly what this guy believes and exactly what he was trying to accomplish. So why does this matter right now? Because Miller's not some fringe figure anymore. He's not just another political operative. He's shaping policy that affects millions of people. Immigration policy, border enforcement, refugee programs. And if his ideology is rooted in white nationalism, if that's what's driving his decision making, then we need to talk about it loudly. The timing of this renewed outrage is crucial too. We're seeing fresh calls for his resignation in the past 48 hours. Something triggered this wave of action. Maybe it's because people are finally connecting the dots. Maybe it's because with Trump's second term underway, the stakes feel higher. Or maybe, just maybe, enough people finally decided that silence equals complicity. And get this, Miller recently posted some cryptic warning on social media after a political opponent won an election. Still active, still politically engaged, still wielding influence, like nothing ever happened. Like those leaked emails were just a minor inconvenience. Like the outrage from civil rights groups and members of Congress was just background noise he could ignore. This is wild. We're living in a time where documented evidence of white nationalist sympathies isn't enough to remove someone from power, where party loyalty trumps everything else, where the culture war has gotten so intense that even the most damning revelations get spun into partisan attacks, where facts don't matter as much as which team you're on. So buckle up, because what we're about to break down isn't just about Stephen Miller. It's about how far we've fallen as a country when it comes to holding powerful people accountable. It's about the normalization of extremism. And it's about why this overnight uproar from Congress might actually matter this time. Or why it might not. We'll see. Let's get into it. Alright, so here's what most people are missing about this whole Stephen Miller situation. The mainstream coverage is treating this like it's just another political scandal. Just another day in Washington. Democrats mad at Republicans. Republicans defending their guy. Nothing new under the sun. But that completely misses the point of what's actually happening here. The leaked emails aren't just controversial opinions. They're not just politically incorrect statements that got taken out of context. These emails show a senior White House advisor, someone with direct access to the president, actively coordinating with right-wing media to push white nationalist narratives into the mainstream. That's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. That's literally what the evidence shows. Let me break down what was actually in these emails because the details matter here. Miller was communicating with Breitbart news editors back when Steve Bannon was running the show there, and he was feeding them story ideas, but not just any story ideas. He was directing them to cover specific angles on immigration that came straight from white nationalist sources. For example, he pushed them to write about Camp of the Saints. Now, if you don't know what that book is, it's a French novel from the 70s that depicts non-white immigration as an invasion that destroys Western civilization. It's been embraced by white supremacist groups for decades. Neo-Nazis love this book. It's their immigration Bible. And Miller wanted Breitbart to reference it, to normalize it, to make it part of the conversation. He also shared links from VDare, a website that the Southern Poverty Law Center classifies as a hate group, a website that publishes scientific racism and promotes white nationalist ideology, a site that argues America should remain majority white. And Miller wasn't just casually browsing this stuff, he was curating it and sending it to journalists as source material, as inspiration for stories they should cover. Come on, like how is this not disqualifying? How is this not an automatic red line? If any other government official got caught doing this, they'd be gone overnight. If a Democratic advisor got caught sharing content from extremist left-wing sites, Republicans would lose their minds. But Miller, he's still here, still influential, still shaping policy. And here's where it gets even more messed up. The timing of when Miller was sending these emails coincides directly with major policy rollouts. The Muslim ban, Miller was pushing anti-Muslim narratives to media at the same time. Family separations at the border, he was sharing content that dehumanized immigrants right as that policy was being implemented. The zero-tolerance approach, all happening while he was coordinating with white nationalist sources. This isn't coincidence. This is strategy. Miller understood that policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. You need public support, or at least public indifference, to get away with extreme measures. So he worked to shift the media narrative, to make his policies seem reasonable by flooding the zone with even more extreme rhetoric, to move the Overton window so far right that his actual policies looked moderate by comparison. The genius, and I use that word loosely, of Miller's approach was plausible deniability. He wasn't writing articles himself. He wasn't going on TV, spouting white nationalist talking points. He was working behind the scenes, feeding ideas to sympathetic media outlets, letting them do the dirty work while he maintained his position in the White House. Clean hands, dirty work. But the Southern Poverty Law Center caught him. They got the emails from a former Breitbart editor who was horrified by what she was seeing. Katie McHugh, that's her name. She came forward with over 900 emails showing Miller's coordination with white nationalist content. 900 emails. That's not a smoking gun. That's an entire arsenal. That's a documented record of someone's ideology and strategy. And what happened when this all came out in 2019? Congressional Democrats were outraged. Civil rights groups demanded action. 25 Jewish members of Congress wrote a letter to Trump calling Miller's views antithetical to the values of our nation and demanding his removal. The Anti-Defamation League condemned him. The NAACP spoke out. The Southern Poverty Law Center called for his firing. Everyone was calling for consequences, but Trump didn't budge. He called the accusations false and said Miller was doing a great job. Republicans in Congress mostly stayed silent or defended Miller. Some even attacked the Southern Poverty Law Center, claiming it was a partisan organization trying to smear a conservative. The White House press secretary said Miller was proud of his work and had no intention of resigning. Total stonewalling. So nothing happened. Miller kept his job, kept his influence, kept shaping immigration policy. And here's the thing, by not facing consequences then, it set a precedent. It showed that you could have documented ties to white nationalist ideology and still serve at the highest levels of government, as long as you had the right political protection, as long as your party was willing to look the other way. Fast forward to now. Trump's back in office for his second term, and Miller's back too. Maybe not in the exact same role, but he's still in the orbit, still politically active. That cryptic social media post after a recent election, that was Miller signaling he's still a player, still influencing the conversation, still relevant. And that's why we're seeing this renewed push from Congress, over 100 members signing letters demanding his resignation, because they realize, maybe too late, that letting this slide the first time was a mistake, that you can't normalize this kind of extremism without consequences, that if you don't draw the line somewhere, there is no line. But let's be real for a second. Are you kidding me? Like, what are the chances Miller actually resigns? What are the chances Trump removes him from any advisory role? Based on history, pretty much zero. Because in today's political environment, admitting fault is seen as weakness. Standing by controversial figures is seen as strength. Loyalty trumps morality. Party trumps country. This is what the culture war has done to us. It's made it impossible to have shared standards for acceptable behavior. What used to be universally condemned, white nationalist ideology, is now just another partisan issue. Democrats say it's disqualifying. Republicans say it's a witch hunt. And the truth gets lost somewhere in between. Lost in the noise and the spin and the endless partisan warfare. The immigration policies that Miller championed, let's talk about those for a minute. The Muslim ban affected hundreds of thousands of people. Families were separated. People were detained at airports. Students couldn't return to school. Workers couldn't get back to their jobs. All because Miller pushed for extreme vetting policies that targeted people based on religion and national origin. Courts struck parts of it down as unconstitutional, but the damage was done. The message was sent. Family separations at the border. That was Miller's baby too. The zero tolerance policy that resulted in thousands of children being taken from their parents. Kids in cages, toddlers in detention facilities, crying children looking for their mothers. The images that shocked the world. Miller defended it, called it a deterrent, said it was necessary to stop illegal immigration. No empathy, no humanity, just cold calculation. And where did those policy ideas come from? Now we know. They came from someone who was consuming white nationalist propaganda, who was influenced by sources that view non-white immigration as an existential threat, who sees immigrants not as human beings seeking a better life, but as invaders threatening American culture, as a disease that needs to be stopped at all costs. That's the context that's missing from most coverage. The policies aren't separate from the ideology. They're directly connected. You can't understand the cruelty of Miller's immigration approach without understanding the worldview driving it. A worldview shaped by white nationalist sources. A worldview that sees diversity as weakness and immigration as invasion. And here's what really gets me. Miller's not stupid. He went to Duke. He worked his way up through Republican politics. He knows how to operate in the system. He knows what is acceptable to say publicly versus what stays behind closed doors. He's smart enough to use dog whistles instead of bullhorns. But the emails reveal what he really believes, what he really wants, and it's uglier than most people realize. The fact that over 100 members of Congress are demanding action now, that's significant. That's not normal political posturing. That's a recognition that this has gone too far, that there have to be some lines that can't be crossed. Even in our hyper-partisan era, some things should be disqualifying. Some ideologies should be beyond the pale. But will it matter? That's the question we're all about to find out. Because if Miller survives this renewed scrutiny, if he keeps his influence despite everything, then we'll know exactly where we stand as a country. We'll know that documented white nationalist sympathies aren't enough to remove someone from power, that party loyalty really does trump everything else, and that the normalization of extremism is complete. So let's break down what this all actually means, because there are 3 big takeaways here that everyone needs to understand. 3 things that go way beyond just Stephen Miller and his leaked emails. 3 things that tell us where we are as a country right now. First, this is about accountability at the highest levels of government. Stephen Miller had access to the president. He shaped policies that affected millions of people. Families were separated because of his policies. People were banned from entering the country because of his ideas. And he was doing it all while consuming and promoting white nationalist propaganda. That's not a minor character flaw. That's not just a difference of political opinion. That's a fundamental problem with who gets to wield power in our system. The fact that over 100 members of Congress are demanding his resignation isn't just Democrats being partisan. Yeah, most of them are Democrats, but that's because Republicans have chosen to ignore the evidence. They've decided that defending Miller is more important than condemning white nationalism. Think about what that says. Think about what that normalizes. Think about what message that sends. When you have documented proof, 900 emails showing coordination with hate sites and promotion of racist literature, and one party just shrugs, that's a breakdown of shared values. That's putting political power above basic human decency, and it has consequences, real consequences for real people. The Muslim ban didn't come out of nowhere. Family separations didn't happen by accident. These were policy choices driven by ideology, and now we know what ideology was driving them. White nationalist ideology that views non-white immigrants as threats, that sees diversity as weakness, that wants to preserve some imagined version of a white America that never really existed in the first place. And yeah, I know some people will say I'm being too harsh, that I'm making this too political, but how else are we supposed to interpret emails where a White House advisor is sharing content from literal hate groups? What other explanation makes sense? This isn't about being liberal or conservative. This is about basic standards for who should have power. Second major takeaway, and this is crucial. This story shows how extremism gets mainstreamed. Miller didn't walk into the White House and announce he was a white nationalist. He didn't hold a press conference declaring his allegiance to racist ideology. That's not how it works. He worked behind the scenes. He fed stories to sympathetic media. He used dog whistles and coded language. He made the extreme seem reasonable by constant repetition. That's how it always works. You don't go from normal political discourse to fascism overnight. It's gradual. It's strategic. It's a slow boil. You normalize language that used to be unacceptable. You promote sources that used to be fringe. You make people who would have been outcasts into advisors and policymakers. You shift the window of acceptable debate inch by inch until what was once extreme is now just another opinion. And the scariest part? It worked. Miller had real power, real influence. He implemented policies that reflected his worldview, and millions of Americans either supported those policies or didn't care enough to stop them. The emails were leaked in 2019, and here we are, years later, still having this conversation because nothing changed, nothing happened. The system failed to hold him accountable. Camp of the Saints, the racist novel Miller promoted, is now openly discussed in some conservative circles. People reference it without shame. VDare, the hate site he shared, still publishes daily, still has an audience, still influences people. The ideas that used to be confined to the darkest corners of the internet are now part of mainstream political debate. That's mainstreaming. That's normalization. And Miller played a key role in making it happen. Think about what that means for the future. If someone with documented white nationalist ties can serve in the White House without consequences, what's next? What other extremism becomes acceptable? Where's the line? Because apparently sharing content from literal hate groups isn't enough to cross it. Apparently coordinating with white nationalist sources to shape immigration policy isn't disqualifying. So what is? What would be too far? Third, and this is why the overnight uproar from Congress matters. This is about whether institutions still function, whether checks and balances still exist, whether there's any accountability left in our system, whether we still have standards, or if everything's just become a partisan food fight where nothing matters except winning. Over 100 members of Congress demanding action is significant. It's a formal expression of concern from a major institution. It's elected officials saying this has gone too far. But will it lead to anything? Will Miller actually face consequences? Or will this just be more noise in an already deafening political environment? More outrage that gets swallowed up in the endless news cycle? The cynic in me says nothing changes. Trump stood by Miller before, and he'll do it again. The GOP isn't going to break ranks over this. They've made their choice. Conservative media will frame it as a liberal attack. Fox News will defend him. Talk radio will rally around him. And in a few weeks, everyone will have moved on to the next outrage, the next scandal, the next crisis, and Miller will still be there, still influential, still shaping policy. But maybe, just maybe, this time is different. Maybe the renewed focus forces a reckoning. Maybe enough people finally connect the dots between Miller's ideology and his policies. Maybe the political cost of defending him becomes too high even for Trump. Maybe Republicans start worrying about suburban voters and independents and decide this isn't a hill worth dying on. I'm not holding my breath though, because we've been down this road before. We've seen the evidence, we've heard the outrage, we've read the reports, and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Why would this time be any different? What's changed? Miller's the same guy. The emails are the same. The evidence is the same. So why would the outcome be different? Unless, and here's where it gets interesting, the political dynamics have shifted. Trump's in his second term now. He can't run again. His political capital is finite. He doesn't need to worry about winning another election. Maybe, just maybe, defending Miller isn't worth the cost anymore. Maybe congressional Republicans start thinking about their own futures and decide this is a fight they don't want. Maybe the party finally decides that the liability outweighs the loyalty. Or maybe I'm being naive. Maybe party loyalty really is that strong. Maybe the culture war really has broken our politics that badly. Maybe white nationalism is just another partisan issue now, something Democrats condemn and Republicans defend with no shared reality in between. Maybe we're too far gone for evidence to matter, too polarized for accountability to function. Here's what we know for sure though. The evidence against Miller is overwhelming. The emails are real. The sources he shared are documented. The hate sites he promoted are well known. The ideology is clear. This isn't a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of whether we care, whether we think it matters, whether we believe there should be consequences. And right now, the answer seems to be that about half the country cares and half doesn't. Democrats are horrified. Republicans are defensive. And Miller keeps operating in the shadows, still influencing policy, still shaping the conversation, still pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable, still there. The immigration debate in this country will never be the same because of Miller. He moved the Overton window. He made positions that used to be extreme seem moderate by comparison. He normalized rhetoric that used to be universally condemned. He made it acceptable to talk about immigrants as invaders, to frame diversity as a threat, to treat refugees as enemies. And he did it all while working in the White House with the blessing of the president, with the protection of his party. That's the legacy we're dealing with. That's why this matters. Not just because of Miller himself, but because of what his survival in power represents. The breakdown of norms, the normalization of extremism, the complete partisan capture of what used to be shared American values, the death of accountability, the triumph of loyalty over morality. So what happens next? Congress is demanding action. Civil rights groups are mobilizing. The pressure is building. Media attention is focused. The spotlight is bright. But will it be enough? Will Miller finally face consequences for his documented white nationalist sympathies? Or will this be another example of how broken our system has become? Another case study in the failure of accountability? I'll tell you what I think. I think Miller's not going anywhere. I think Trump will stand by him like he always has. I think the GOP will circle the wagons. And I think in a few months, we'll be having the exact same conversation about some other controversy, some other scandal, some other example of extremism being normalized and defended and protected, because that's where we are now. That's how far we've fallen. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this overnight uproar actually leads somewhere. Maybe accountability still exists. Maybe there are still some lines that can't be crossed without consequences. Maybe evidence still matters in America. Maybe character is still a requirement for power. We're about to find out. And honestly, the answer will tell us everything we need to know about the state of American democracy right now, about who we are as a people, about what we value, about what we're willing to tolerate from our leaders. Stay tuned because this story is far from over. And whatever happens next, it's going to tell us exactly who we are as a country, whether we still believe in anything, whether facts still matter, whether extremism is just another political position, or if it's still something we reject, whether there are any standards left, or if everything's just partisan warfare now. The Stephen Miller saga continues, and we'll be watching every single development, because this isn't just about one advisor. It's about all of us, and what we're willing to accept, what we're willing to normalize, what kind of country we want to be.